Today's scripture is Luke 11:29-36. When the crowds were increasing, he began to say, "This generation is an evil generation. It asks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. For just as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so the Son of Man will be to this generation. The Queen of the South will rise at the judgment with the people of this generation and condemn them, because she came from the ends of the earth to listen to the wisdom of Solomon. And see, something greater than Solomon is here. The people of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because they repented at the proclamation of Jonah. And see, something greater than Jonah is here. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it in a cellar, but on the lampstand, so that those who enter may see the light. Your eye is the lamp of your body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But if it is not healthy, your body is full of darkness. Therefore, consider whether the light in you is not darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, with no part of it in darkness, it will be as full of light as when a lamp gives you light with its rays. This is the word of the Lord.
So I did tell you at the beginning, Jesus is getting a bit salty in this one, but we'll actually get to that in a minute. This past January, I got to go on a pilgrimage of sorts to a place for me that actually kind of oddly felt like holy ground, even though it was in Florida. And you wouldn't necessarily maybe expect to find that in Florida, because you can find a lot of things in Florida. But one of the things that you can find in Florida is the Space Shuttle Atlantis. And for me, being able to go and visit and see the Space Shuttle with my children, who admittedly did not care as much as I did, was really honestly a special, almost sacred experience. And this is my second space shuttle. I've seen the one in California, and now I've seen this one, and one of my life goals is to eventually get to see them all. And the reason is pretty obvious for me anyway. It's because I literally grew up with the space shuttle. And for my entire life, I have got to watch the space shuttle take off. And it was something I enjoyed doing as a child all throughout my adult years. And I was very, very sad when they told us they weren't going to do that anymore and they retired them all. Some of you know this because I've talked about space shuttles before, because that's how much I love them. Bear with me. Now, even if you are not a space shuttle devotee, as I am, there are certain things about this part of NASA and this time in NASA's life that you no doubt do know. And if you were alive in the 80s, one of the things that you no doubt remember to some regard is when we actually lost one of the space shuttles, the Space Shuttle Challenger. I was in school at the time. We lived in California. It was during this brief period we lived in California. And the teacher I had at that time actually was one of the finalists to be the teacher representing California. So if you don't remember, one of the things that made Challenger special in that flight, especially special, is that it had a teacher on board. And there was a national competition where every state got to send a teacher to compete, and then they selected from those teachers one that would eventually be the one that went up into space. And my teacher at the time actually had been one of the finalists to represent California, which was no doubt a big deal, because no doubt in California they have a lot of teachers, because there's just a lot of people. So it was already a special day for us anyway, and a day that we thought was going to be a day of celebration, and of course, it was not. and it would end up becoming really a day of tragedy. And one that, even though I was fairly young at the time, I still remember exceedingly well and can recall very easily. What we would learn after the Challenger exploded and after the investigation that came after, there was an investigation called the Rogers Commission, and what they would discover as part of that is that the Challenger was a victim of what is a quintessential example of what we call groupthink. Right? There were people who knew that there could have been a problem. There were people who knew that the problem that eventually became a problem was a problem. But the group of people who was in charge at the time and who were the ones who made all of these decisions and really made those decisions together either didn't hear or didn't want to hear about the potential problems. And what ends up happening that morning is what, again, we would classically call today groupthink, which is where a group of people get together, typically all either already believing or wanting to believe a certain thing. And when groups of people get together, already believing or wanting to believe a certain thing, like, no, everything's going to be fine, this launch is safe, we have this amazing ability as people to, without really even a lot of intention, sit around and just agree with each other. Most of us like being around people that we agree with. Most of us like being agreeable. And when you put these together, and you put groups of people together, you end up with this phenomenon that, again, we call groupthink, where people continue to believe as they've already believed before. Now, it's really hard when a group is acting that way to challenge the group. It's really hard to be the voice that says, well, wait a minute, maybe we want to think about this differently. Because all of us have so many things in our daily lives that we already have to think about. We're not usually looking for more things to think about. And so one of the problems with groupthink is it really does do a couple of things. It limits creativity, and it also eliminates personal responsibility. No one person made a decision that morning about whether the shuttle should go up or not. A group of people did. And a group of people got together and conveniently decided to do the thing that was the most convenient to decide, which was to do the thing they were already planning to do, and to not listen to any new information that may be coming their way. This is a shortcut that we as people have, and it's actually, most of the time, a really helpful one. It helps us to continue to function as a group, and it helps us to continue to move forward. There's a lot of stuff, like on a Sunday morning, that we have to think about, and there's a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily have to think about because it's basically the same way every Sunday, right? And so we don't tend to think about what order things go in or anything else because it's the same order every Sunday. And that's convenient, right? So we can spend our time and invest our time thinking and working on the things that we actually need to think and work about. So while oftentimes when we talk about groupthink, we talk about it in terms of it being a negative thing, it isn't always. It is in fact a shortcut that human beings use to continue on in our daily lives, in our regular lives, putting in as little effort as possible in the places we don't need to put effort in. All right. Jesus, in this story, is encountering groupthink. That is the challenge that he is running up against when the Pharisees and the Sadducees start challenging him. They are coming to Jesus and saying, you aren't doing things the way that we've always done them. You're not doing the way that we understand how to do it. And oh, look at us. We are all the people, and we are the religious leaders of this time, and we all do things this way, and we don't understand why you're not doing it the way that we've always done. And so, as is often the case when Jesus is confronted by religious leaders, he has some spirited replies to them, as we heard this morning. And without a doubt, by the way, when you do encounter Jesus sounding or feeling a little more aggressive or really taking people to task, it is almost always the religious leaders that he is talking to or arguing with. And I often remember that as a religious leader myself. It keeps me humble. Not really, but that's a big task. And so Jesus tells them, and they're basically saying, Jesus, if this new thing that you are talking about is the new way, if we're actually supposed to listen to you, then you need to give us a sign. You need to do something that demonstrates that that we need to stop doing the way things we used to do and now listen to you. And so they demand a sign, and then Jesus gives the response that we read today, where he says, you're not going to get one. The only sign you're going to get is the sign of Jonah. And this is the only place in the New Testament where Jonah is actually mentioned by name. And he basically, in this situation, Jesus is basically equating himself to Jonah. Jesus is Jonah here. Meaning, Jesus came to bring them a message. He came to tell them something important in the same way that Jonah did. And they have the same choice that the people in Nineveh had, which is they can choose to listen. They can choose to hear what's being told to them, even though it's different from what they've always understood. It's different from what they already believe together. It's challenging the status quo. Has all of that baggage with it. They can choose to either listen to Jesus in the way that the people in Nineveh listened to Jonah, with the implication being, if you do so, then you will be blessed in the same way Nineveh was, or you can choose not to. Jesus is pretty sure that the religious leaders of his day are going to make a different choice than the people in Nineveh did all those many years before, and those of us who know where the story goes knows that that's true. So Jesus came to proclaim something important to them, and the people of the time really were not interested in having what they understood to be the right and the wrong way to do things disturbed. They were deeply enmeshed in the way that they already think, what they already believe, and they weren't interested in this guy who was coming along to try to help them understand things a little bit differently. And so Jesus goes on after saying this whole thing about Jonah, you're not going to get one of those, and then starts to talk about the lamp and the lampstand. Now, he's mentioned this before. It's one of his favorite analogies to use, but he talks about this idea of the lamp and the lampstand, and this idea, if you have a lamp that gives off light, right, what do? You don't put it in the basement. If you're going to put something out into the world, if you're going to put light out into the world, if you're going to put good out into the world, you put it up somewhere where people can see it and enjoy it. And then he goes on and talks more about the light in that. He talks about light and the light from a person's eyes. Now, this is a little bit lost on us because we actually know today how our eyes actually work. Right? And even if you only have a basic understanding of biology, we kind of know today how our eyes work, right? There is light, it goes into your eyes, it goes on the rods and the cones, and I can't remember which one does what. And then your brain interprets that into this thing you actually see. And the thing that still boggles my mind to this day that I can't get past is the fact that when the light goes into your eye, it's actually upside down in your eyes, and then your brain converts it right side up. It hurts my head to think that that's how it works, but apparently that's how it works, right? Right? Yes. And if it's not, I'm sorry. All right. In Jesus' day, they didn't actually know how the eyes worked. And in fact, they had it a little bit backwards. In Jesus' day, the prevailing theory was that light was not only something that entered your eyes, light was also something that came out of your eyes. That you saw things because there was light that came out of your eyes and then interacted with the world, and that's how you were able to see the things you were able to see. And by the way, if you Google Jesus with laser eyes, you will find it. I don't know why he's shooting down a spaceship in this picture. But if you think about it in terms of basically like Superman's like death ray vision or whatever, that's kind of how they thought it worked. And obviously we know that that's not actually how it works. But what's important is that that's how they thought it worked. So when Jesus talks about the light inside of us coming out, it's because they thought that's actually how it worked, right? That by observing, by what we were looking at, there was something that was coming out of us that was affecting the world around us and allowed us to see the things that we see. I understand why they thought that way. I'm glad that we know actually how it works today. That makes a lot of other things possible. But the thing that I really like about the way that they thought that it worked is it helps us understand, it really helps us understand that how we move through the world and what we put out on the world matters. If we're walking around like shooting light out of our eyes, right, that is interacting with things around us, what that tells us is what we look at matters. And where we put our attention matters. And where we put our attention, other people will likely put their attention to. So Jesus wants us to put good light out into the world. That we don't simply receive from the world around us. We don't simply receive what's going on. We don't simply receive from people, but who we are, how we move, what we do, what we say, all of that matters a tremendous amount as well. And if we are full of God, and if we are full of light and the good light that Jesus wants us to be full of, then we will put good light out into the world. And if we are not, then we won't. Jesus is trying to interrupt the groupthink that's happening in the religious community that he's a part of. And he's trying to tell them there's another way to be. He's trying to tell them that there's another way to live. He's trying to tell them that there is an opportunity to live in grace, to live in peace, to show forgiveness, to receive forgiveness. And there's another way to do that that is based on God and based on his teachings. Now, I said at the beginning that we know what happened to the space shuttle because there was a commission set up to investigate it. And that is mostly true. There was a commission set up to investigate it. The commission actually, though, was itself struggling, and it was struggling because they were getting a lot of pressure to basically not say anything negative. And actually, there was a real danger that groupthink was going to take over the commission that was studying the groupthink that destroyed the space shuttle. And the only reason that really it didn't is because there was one person on the committee named Richard Feynman. And Richard Feynman is an interesting guy, actually. But he's a Nobel Prize winning physicist, which is why he was on the commission in the first place. But he was really one of the only ones that wasn't really willing to just go along and toe the company line. And he rather famously did a demonstration in front of Congress with the material, the failed material that actually caused the problem, where he actually put it in ice water in front of them and demonstrated the issue right there in front of them. And if it really weren't for Richard Feynman and his willingness to basically stand out and buck the system and go against the groupthink that was taking over his committee, we may not actually know today exactly what happened all those years ago. It turns out that who we surround ourselves with matters a great deal. Because when we are putting ourselves and the light inside us out into the world, everyone around us is doing the same. Who we are with, who we spend time with, how we choose to spend that time matters. Because we can't help but want to be part of a group. And when we are part of a group, we will inevitably be affected by those around us. Jesus knows this. He knows that there's a lot of people in his day who are part of a group that is not helpful and isn't being helpful to other people, and he wants them to behave differently. So he comes, like Jonah came, to deliver a message and an invitation. And his hope is that they will come along, or somebody will come along, and choose to take him up on his offer. We know, because we are here today, that somebody did. There was a group, not everybody, not all of the religious leaders, and in fact, not very many of them of their day, but there was a group that said and decided to listen to Jesus in the same way that there was a group that decided to listen to Jonah in Nineveh. And because of those folks and their willingness to do that, everything that we would know as Christianity and our faith and everything that came after would continue to be. I don't know why in this picture the person in the front is holding a duck. This is the picture you get when you Google groupthink. Sometimes going along with the group is the right thing to do. There is wisdom in groups. We inherit so much wisdom from those who came before us. We inherit so much wisdom from each other. There's a reason that we have this shortcut built into our society and who we are. It can be helpful. And sometimes it cannot. The challenge for each and every one of us is to recognize those places where God may be sending a little bit of a Jonah message to us. There are times in each of our lives when God will try to break through our routines and all the shortcuts we take and all the things we do, that God will try to break through that and try to help us understand that maybe there's something in our lives we need to do or be living in a little different way. The challenge is to be open to those experiences. Sometimes, also, Jesus may be calling us to be the one that raises our hand, who asks the hard question, who pushes back when we recognize that things maybe aren't the way that they ought to be. It's not often comfortable to do that. Jonah ran away and got swallowed by a fish because he really didn't want to be that person. And yet, God needed him to be, and because he was, Nineveh was blessed. Jesus is being that person for his people in his day, and they will no doubt, as we know where the story goes, not particularly respond well to it. In fact, Jesus will go as far as someone can go for somebody else, all the way to the cross and the empty tomb. We are likely not going to be called on to go to some faraway city and proclaim a message with a bullhorn. We are probably not going to be called on to go as far as Jonah did or as far as Jesus did. We are probably going to be called on to be the one that reminds our friends or our families or our coworkers of some important things, especially the important thing of we are called to love God, love our neighbor, and love ourselves. If we look around and say, if we look around the groups that we were a part of, the people we were hanging out with, and say, I'm not sure everything that's going on right here, right now, is as it should be, it may very well be that means that we are called to be the ones to perhaps point it out and try to find a way to love people into living a little better. If we look back at our own lives, and if I look back at my own life for sure, I can think of a lot of people who interrupted my routine, who snapped me out of some trap that I was in, and definitely loved me into living a little better. Part of what we are called on to be as a church is to continuously do that for each other. Amen.